Then we're going to address any questions that you have about data mining and predictive analytics. This is the free consulting segment of our webinar, open access to the modeling agency's advanced analytic gurus, senior consultant Scott Terry. And stepping in for Keith is another highly seasoned, longtime TMA senior consultant, Scott Clendaniel. Scott, thanks for coming in on very short notice. We're truly grateful for that. Keith had to run. So each question that you submit will receive multiple perspectives. Like I say, we just have a few, so there's still room for the overtime that we have here. And we've still got a little over half of those who started out the event, so we appreciate your continued interest. So let's go ahead and start with the first question. This comes in from Basharala. And I'll tell you, this was a question, this is the exact same question. I'm getting a heavy echo here. The exact same question that that came up at a recent TDWI conference and actually ended up getting into a heated discussion. The instructor had to pull the classroom back together and get back on course. You'd not think it for this kind of a technical question, but Basharala asks, what method do you implement in your project? Is it an agile method or the waterfall model? And I'll just touch on this for 10 seconds and say that in the room, I think that the arguments generally came out that agile kind of put a drag on process, on the process. You do have to go through phases methodically, and to continually go through reporting, it really slowed it down. The waterfall model, as long as it's not too rigid, I mean, there are a lot of cyclical things that the modeling practice framework had to build in and expand upon beyond what the cross-industry standard process for data mining, CRISP-DM, would allow. And so those were the primary issues around agile versus waterfall. But let me send this first over to Scott Clendaniel and see what opinions you have or any experience that you have or advice. Scott? And Scott, I'm showing that your mic is muted from your end, not on mine. I'm going to double check. There we go.
Sorry about that.
You're good.
Data mining is my forte. Apparently, operating GoToWebinar is not. Okay. In answer to the question, I would say the place that I would start is how the organization is using its current strategy for software development. If you are currently an agile shop, it'll probably be easier to implement an agile methodology. If you are currently a waterfall shop, then I would choose that. My personal feeling is that the agile methodology has worked for me most effectively because of the iterative nature of the project. And if you follow the really strict rules of waterfall, once a section of a project is completed, you cannot go back.
That's my great advice. Yeah, no, that's way more than 2 cents. Scott Terry, anything to add, or do you want us to go on to the next?
Yeah, very quickly. Can you hear me okay, by the way?
Sure. Perfect.
Okay. Well, I'd make a little bit of a distinction. You know, what we're talking about is we're talking about predictive analytics, and we're comparing it to software development. The two can coincide, but they're not necessarily the same. So, you know, agile or waterfall, with respect to Scott the Greater's answer, you know, I agree with that. You know, go with what flows with you. But also bear in mind that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, and the 7-step process that we define in terms of developing a predictive analytics project can coincide with either way, more probably better with agile than waterfall. But, you know, it's designed specifically for developing a predictive analytics project or practice.
Scott, I got to say, you arrived in 1 minute where it took that room to get heated for 8 to 10 minutes and come to the conclusion that, you know, that modeling practice framework model, or, you know, any kind of structured model around analytics is really the way to go. It does provide for continual documentation, for communication. Matter of fact, it forces communication across those who either contribute to or benefit from the analytic effort. And that kind of, we weren't purposely trying to be Switzerland, but it really did arrive at blending the two together for the best overall effect. And that's what the modeling practice framework does. It does have, like you say, stages that kind of waterfall, but at the same time, it's continually communicating across the team and providing insights and corrections the whole time. So I think that's hopefully, Basharallah, that's a good response. And like Scott Clandaniel said, fit it to the existing structure that you have as well. It can adapt, and you can put emphasis as it relates to what you run with in your organization. Robert asks, I love this question. Robert asks, should you start with a question or business process with executive sponsorship, or should you germinate organically from an idea or proof of concept? And I'm going to say that I'm going to myself weigh much more toward starting with the business question in mind, and certainly with the executive sponsorship. In our experience, I don't think you want to be a technology looking for a home. As I said in the introduction, we don't want to just come up with some interesting insights that at the end of the day doesn't really align with organizational motivations or what leadership wants to achieve. So, you know, we'll know what to do with the insights that come out from the data, but you want to make sure that your data supports the objectives that are important to the organization. And that's why that modeling practice framework that you saw, it starts with assess, and that's really looking to take the motivations of leadership and understand, you know, what they want to achieve, and then we'll make sure that the environment, you know, there's a premise for adoption ultimately, or making it operationalized, that all those things are there, but it all comes under leadership's motivation. I hope I didn't hog that question up, but this time let's go to Scott Terry first. And Scott, when it comes to you know, the business process, the question and executive sponsorship versus organically coming up with a, you know, starting with a proof of concept and seeing what the data provides, what would you like to expand on?
Well, I'll get to the chase really quickly. I don't see any of those as being mutually exclusive. First of all, it's always important to have an executive sponsor. You're going to be able to get what you need done a lot quicker if you've got an executive sponsor. And quite often, you know, the executive sponsor begins by, I have a question. Is this something that we can do? And the result of that initial question is to come up with a plan, and that plan is to produce a proof of concept. So I see them as all being tied together, not necessarily mutually exclusive.
Yeah, good point. They have to combine and cooperate to come up with what will be the resulting plan. Scott Clandaniel, would you like to expand any other ideas?
I would just like to amplify what Scott the Wiser was saying. I think it's analogous to a three-legged stool. It's kind of silly to argue which of the three legs is most important. If any of the three are missing, you're going to have a problem. So I think you need to find a convergence on a project that executive management is going to support, or you're going to be swimming upstream. Two, it's got to be a project that is of interest to the business, is going to have an impact. And three, to something that was mentioned earlier, don't bite off more than you can chew, especially on your first one. So you're looking for an intersection of those three legs of the stool.
Great ideas. Yep, that's great. And the next question, I love this too. It's almost like the next one's from Moria, and it looks like Moria and Robert are in cahoots here, because Moria's question just extends Robert's, and I think it's phenomenal. I have a response that I want to give here, and I'm afraid I'm going to ramble, so I'm going to do my best to button up, and I'll wait until last. Moria extends the question with what's the best way to source new ideas for predictive analytics projects and then prioritize them? What's the best way to source ideas and for predictive analytics projects and then prioritize them? So I think we started with Scott Terry last time. This time let's start with Scott Clandaniel.
Gee, that's a great question. There are lots of different ways to be able to do it. The way that I would start off with is, what is the business problem that is driving everyone batty right at the moment? Meaning, is it you've got a customer churn problem? Is it that fraud is spiking? Is it, you know, what are the things that are actually causing significant blockage of senior management to be able to do what they can do? And is there something within that data mining can help solve? And I think it's important to get input from lots of different areas. but that's where I would start.
Great advice. Scott, Terry.
I'd extend what Scott the Greater said by saying, you basically go to the ultimate users or the sponsors of who would benefit from it, usually within a business organization that would be marketing and finance. But it also has to do with how, where you're at in terms of your own involvement with predictive analytics within your organization. It may require additional steps, such as getting somebody to come in and give an overview of what predictive analytics is all about if you've never done it before, as compared to being a more mature organization in terms of your predictive analytics capabilities.
Great advice as well, and that's what's fun about the Q&A. We get different perspectives, different experiences. We all run under the same kind of development framework. But we all have different experiences. Mine is actually from a project management perspective. I'm actually not a direct practitioner, and I guess that brings a different one as well. And from the modeling practice framework, one of the first things we want to do when we come in is, in the assess phase, again, we want to interview any who either contribute to or benefit from the analytic effort. So when we go into an organization, a lot of times we'll find that the organization has 2, 3, maybe 4 ideas, and they're all important. They're more important, certainly from those who sponsor the project. But what we want to do is go around and further populate that, because as we go through the comprehensive assessment, we find more aspects that may cause a project to be disqualified. So we may start out with those 4 or 5 initial ideas. We want to go around the room and really elevate those to even 15 or 18 ideas, because as we go through to qualify them and try to find the valid projects that will adapt to the environment without a lot of retrofitting, that's motivating either to the users or that can be fully operationalized and in reality, looking downstream, bringing the future into the present. Certainly that's motivational to leadership. That's the only way it's going to really be fully adopted, and certainly looking at whether the target behavior is available in the data that we have. Is it going to support the questions that we want? A lot of those are going to disqualify. So then we start out with 4 or 5 ideas. We balloon it up to 15 to maybe 18. We qualify and disqualify a lot of them. We come back to the 5 that are going to be viable, and then we want to prioritize them and understand what's going to have the greatest effect. It's not always ROI. Many times it is, but it's not always, and that's what's going to help us to really arrive at projects that are going to be both viable and prioritized. So hopefully these 3 perspectives were very helpful to you, and certainly grateful for all of you who have hung in. Look at this, it's almost 25 after the hour. We only had 3 or 4 questions. I think we hit them all. So thanks for your patience and sticking with them, but at almost 25 after, we better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation in the polling, as well as Scott and Keith for their great segments, and Scott and Scott for your highly informative Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. And from there, we'll hope that you've offered permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter, and that you'll consider joining us at a public training event soon. So make sure to register early to secure one of the few remaining very early bird 25% discount spaces for Orlando next month, or look ahead to Washington, D.C. in May, or Los Angeles in August if the timing and location work out better for you. Keep in mind that if your colleagues can join you anytime, they get 30% off at the same event. It doesn't have to be an early registration for your colleagues to get that deep discount. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget, but you'd like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Escort on Call program. Escort on Call is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up an Escort on Call account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then remain on call until the next time that you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Escort on Call description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. So on behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.